All right, so we just discussed earlier on how to set the thrust bearing for the 5.0 Coyotes. We also showed you guys how to follow ARP to make sure the torque specs are correct, along with making sure that if you are going to use ARP hardware, that you make sure that you have an align on these blocks. So once you guys get the crank in and set your thrust, the next step is to install the rods and pistons. Now, with these blocks right here, if you guys are using an aftermarket piston and an aftermarket rod, you guys need to make sure that you pay attention to what your ring manufacturer recommends as far as lubrication. A lot of guys run Total Seal. Total Seal is a very common ring manufacturer. They're very high quality. And I'm going to show you guys over here what they have. If you want to come up closer here and show them what Total Seal recommends for prep before we install these things. So we take this dry lube. It looks like this little graphite powder like this. And Total Seal actually made a complete video on this. But I'll just go over it because I'm following it for you guys. So what you want to do is on a bare cylinder, regardless if it's sleeved or not. So I have a sleeved one, but this will work just fine on the cast iron stock sleeves that come with these blocks. You want to take a microfiber towel, spray with some WD-40, and then really clean each cylinder and then wipe them dry. Once every single cylinder is clean, you're going to take this little graphite powder, dab it on your finger, and then you're just going to work it into the cylinders. You can see this light greenish color to this. If it's light green, that means that the cylinders are clean. If they turn black, then that means your cylinders are dirty. You're going to have to go in and wipe that stuff out and then re-clean it. If you want to come on this side and show them. So we already did one bank already, the driver's side bank here. And then I'm going to work on this side to show you guys the steps and the processes to go through this stuff. So you guys can see right here that these are not standard pistons. These are a MAHLE, about 12.5:1 compression ratio pistons. And then we're running a CP Carrillo Bullet Series I-beam connecting rod to build a pretty aggressive naturally aspirated block here. I'm gonna flip this block upside down and show them. All right, so if you want to look inside of here, what you guys can see is that you have all of the rods orienting the same way per bank. And that's exactly what is going to happen on each bank side of these blocks. If your rods, if you happen to mark them, which you should be marking them, right, and your marks are not lining up, show them on this side here. I'll show you what this side of the rods look like. You're going to see down in there, they're numbered. I don't know if you can get an angle in there or not. You'll see it on the other side. Let's see. Can you see any of those numbers in there?
Like the yellow and blue and all that?
No, the orange ones that are underneath here of my finger.
Underneath? No, not with
You're not
this
even
side,
looking at my finger.
I am.
You're on the wrong connector. There you go, there's my finger. So you see those numbers down there, guys? So this is different than the yellow straight marks that I have over here on this side. So because I see all yellow over here, I know that I installed all the rods correctly. Now let's turn this block back upside down and then we'll start installing these pistons. So when you're installing rods and pistons, guys, you kind of want the block to be at a level surface. The reason why you don't want it cocked is because when you go to take your piston installation tool, whether it's one of these clamps or one of these ARP jones, if it's on an angle, it's not going to really sit flat all the time, and you could risk bending the ring by installing it incorrectly. So if you guys want to come over here, I'll show you what the entire process of installing a piston looks like. So find number 5 here. So once you get your piston out, the first thing that you want to do is give it a quick glance over to make sure that everything looks perfectly fine. There isn't no obvious damage or anything like that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually clean this piston before assembly. You can pre-do this. This isn't like something you have to wait till last minute. I just chose to. So we could take some regular parts cleaner or brake clean, either or will work fine. And then we find a clean portion of the rag. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna clean the entire inside. And then you can see that dirt. So that's the stuff that we're trying to remove that's inside of here. It's inevitably going to be like a dirty piston because you guys are gonna be balancing these pistons. And if you're removing material inside of these pistons, it absolutely is gonna get dirty. And then just a quick little cleanup will be just fine. So we're gonna wipe the inside of the wrist pins. And then give the entire outside of the piston a good wipe down. Try to avoid putting brake clean on the actual skirt material because brake clean is extremely corrosive and it will remove a lot of materials and paints and stuff. So I just give it a quick wipe down if I do accidentally get a little bit on there. It's not the end of the world if you're quick with it, but that's perfectly fine right there. So now we got a clean piston. All right, the next step is you're gonna wanna install your first wrist lock. Now there's a couple of different types of these. There's a spiral version and then there's a C-clip version. I'm sure there's other kinds of versions too, but those are the two main common types. These C-clip ones are a pain in the ass to get in, and they really are. So I'm gonna show you guys not really a good technique. You guys are gonna kind of find what works for you, but this is what works for me. So I start out, I don't want to put my opening on the opening of the tang here. What I wanna do is I wanna find somewhere in the groove, and I relatively wanna keep the lock as close to the piston as possible while I'm gonna pry for leverage on this side right here. So you gotta be careful with these. So I'm gonna take this tool right here, find this side, and then I'm gonna try to push this in. And take a couple times. I'm gonna get a bigger screwdriver. I'm gonna take my time and show you guys the entire process here for this one, simply because this is a tedious job and I don't want it. Some guys can just pop these in. I'm not the best at it. Motherfuck. Let's see if this works this way. Oh, almost got it. There we go. Get that little Johnson there, and then we'll come from this side. So it wasn't pretty, but we got it in. You guys can find your own little technique and what works for you. But now that we got the first one in, don't really worry about the marring on the outside of here. Obviously, if you can avoid it, avoid it. But a little bit of marring out here isn't really gonna hurt anything. What you wanna be concerned about marring up is the inside where your wrist pin is going to sit. If you damage up inside of here, that can harm the operation of the piston with the wrist pin. So now that we got the clip in, what we're going to do is we're going to follow what MAHLE wants to make sure we're completing, and that is to make sure that your C-clips are fully seated. So your C-clips naturally probably want to do something similar to this picture right here, which isn't fully seated in the groove, as you can see to the picture. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna apply pressure to the the inside of the C-clip right here, trying to force it into this groove in case if my C-clip is sitting like this. The best way to do that is to take a flathead screwdriver, and then we're just gonna go around, just putting a little bit of pressure all the way around the groove to make sure that it's seated in there. All right, once it's seated in there fine, then go ahead and lube one side. I'm using Lucas synthetic grease. Now, there's a benefit to using grease over lube, and it's not because it's for better break-in. The reason why you would use a grease over an assembly lube like this AL8, which both will be perfectly fine for break-in, no one is better than the other, but there is a reason why you would choose between the two. If you plan on having your short block sitting for a while before total assembly and before you actually get it into the car for first startup, what you're gonna wanna use is you're gonna wanna use a grease. The reason being is this stuff doesn't come off of the parts, and it's gonna sit there and it's gonna hold, and it's gonna give you nice lubrication for first break-in when you guys get ready for first startup and stuff. If you use this AL8 and you, like, let's say, let it sit for 2-3 weeks before first startup, there is a potential that this stuff is run off. Ideally, 2 or 3 weeks, you would still be perfectly fine with something like this, but I'm just gonna use grease just in case. So we got one side of our piston in here. Now it's time to get the pin. That's where my pin's right here. So this is number 5. So same deal, we're gonna clean our wrist pin just like we cleaned our piston. Give that a quick wipe down. And then we're going to lube this wrist pin with the same grease that we put inside of the bore for the wrist pin inside the piston. Just a little bit all the way around is fine. And then just some nice even. You do, like, people say that you can like be super generous with this stuff and it's not gonna hurt anything. I mean, to an extent that has some truth, but ideally you wanna be conservative a little bit in your assembly lube. You wanna make sure the entire part is lubed, obviously, but if you use too much, you're just gonna have an entire amount of excessive lubrication, and in my opinion, it's just kind of a waste of product. Okay, so let's get the rod now. So I'll show you guys some of the markings that I have on here. I've labeled all my rods, but I've also inputted the clearances for the small end and the big end. And then on this side, I included like total weights, small end weight, big end weight, and then just some markings to kind of identify where the cap is supposed to be oriented and stuff like that. So basic little CP Corilla rod, nothing really to it. Chamfer side on this side, flat side on this one. Flat faces the rod, chamfer side faces the crank. So let's get this open. Ideally, you'd want a rod vise, but I know I didn't really torque these that hard, so that's why I'm just doing it on the bench. If these were torqued, it would almost be, I wouldn't say impossible, but it would be extremely difficult to try to get these rod bolts off and on without a connecting rod vise. So I am going to clean this rod. I've already cleaned these rods prior to marking them, but I'm just going to give one little final wipe down. I'm not gonna clean any of the surfaces that I've labeled because the brake clean would just wipe away all of my markings and stuff. And my rack is pretty clean. All right. So what I like to do is some people like to have a way that they have the paint markers and orientation and stuff like that, and you can do that, but I feel like if you're not on a repetitive mindset in doing something like that, it can be really easy to make a mistake. So what I do is I just come over here and I physically look at each piston well. So you guys can see inside of there that I already have connecting rod number 1 facing the left side, and then connecting rod number 5 right here, which shares the same connecting rod journal, will be on the right hand side. Because it's on the right hand side, like I told you guys earlier, come over here on this so they can get an angle. The chamfer side is going to face the connecting rod, or I'm sorry, excuse me, face the crankshaft, and the flat side is going to face the connecting rod. So this would be the correct way that I want this connecting rod in here. Chamfer side toward the crank, flat side toward the rod. In these pistons, they tell you the orientation that needs to go towards the front. So on the driver's side bank, it will look like your piston is upside down because the front arrow needs to still face the front. And MAHLE didn't make, 4 that are painted on this side and the other 4 that are painted on the other side. They make all the pistons exactly the same. So just like this is the correct orientation of this one. So I will flip this upside down, come over here. Get my wrist pin, and then we'll slide that Jones in. Boom, just like that. And then we'll do the other side of this wrist lock. Hopefully this one will go in a little bit easier than the last one, but they never fucking do. Because these things are made from the fucking devil. I don't know what asshole made these, but fuck you. They're meant for longevity, brother. Yeah, longevity, my fucking nuts.